Welcome back. My name is Shannon Timchula and I'm the owner and creator over at Knotted Threads Co. Recently I've released my third PDF pattern, the Mayfield Backpack. It is an intermediate advanced sewing pattern, and I do recommend that you use either a semi-industrial or an industrial machine to complete it. There are a couple bulky areas. But if you want to play around with some fabric choices, maybe some interfacing choices, you can do that on your own, and you can maybe make that a little bit more domestic friendly, but as it's designed in the pattern, I do recommend, again, a semi-industrial or industrial machine to complete. You do have to purchase the PDF pattern to complete this bag. This is a companion tutorial, but in that PDF pattern, you get US letter pieces, A4 pieces, a projector file, and cut files. The A4 and US letter pieces are formatted to be as compact as they can to save as much paper as they can, and I've arranged them for easy piecing. And the projector file is formatted to perfectly fit on a 24 by 36 cutting mat, and I've arranged it so that you can get the most use of your 18 by around 53-54 inch roll of Cork faux leather or vinyl. You can get a full exterior out of one 18-inch directional roll, so that's a bonus. And of course you get the instructions included in that in the pattern that give you detailed step-by-step instructions, tips and tricks along the way, and I include over 300 high-quality photos. Now, high-quality photos means that this pattern is formatted to be device-friendly, not printer-friendly. It is about 80 pages long, so that's a lot of paper if you decide to do that, but more power to you if you'd like to. Without further ado, let's get to sewing. Okay, for the hardware needs, everything is stated in the pattern, of course, but what I'll be using today are all anti-brass hardware featuring a really pretty custom magnet from Thumbs and Thimbles. I'm making a Lord of the Rings theme bag, so of course I had to have nice pretty hardware. You'll need 1-inch rectangle rings as well as 1-inch tri-glides. I recommend using the tri-glides with the movable bar in the center so that it helps lock in your webbing into place. You will use 5 purse feet and 2 zipper or cord ends. They need to be 3/8 inch wide so that they fit the drawstrings. I like to put in a handmade tag, normally I use a woven tag, but today I'm going to use my favorite Lord of the Rings Cork tag and my logo label. You'll also need number 5 zipper tape and 1-inch wide webbing. You have some options on what you'd like, what you can use for webbing for your bag. I'd say kind of the thicker and sturdier the better, just so that it grips onto your tri-glide and holds that adjustment position that you have put it in. If you're using thin, slippery vinyl or webbing such as nylon or like really slippery polyester, then what you'll find is that while you're wearing it, you might be able to lock in the position, but as you set it down and it rests, it will slide right along the webbing and you'll lose your the length adjustment that you have made. So just see if you can figure out the balance between what look you want and the functionality of the piece that you're using. I've decided that seatbelt webbing works fine, so that's what I'm going to use today. You will also need rivets. This is my little bucket of 8mm rivets. My cap width is 8mm, but also my post length is 8mm, but you'll have to make the judgment based on your material choices how long the post length needs to be. For using Mora vinyl and the materials that I use, I'm able to use anywhere from 8 to 9mm of post length, but for your vinyl or faux leather or cork that you're using, you may need to up it to 10 or maybe 12mm post length. it's just really hard to have a blanket length to cover everything, because if you get it too tall, then you're going to have crooked set rivets. And if it's too short, you're not going to be able to completely set those rivets. So just use your best judgment, but definitely have various lengths available if you are worried about not being able to set them properly. So for waterproof canvas, that's what we're using for the body of the lining. That is being used for the slip pocket, the base, lower main lining, and lower back lining. This is so that we don't have to cut and fuse an additional pieces of woven interfacing if you decide to use woven. You can absolutely use woven for your lining. Just for ease of cutting, like I said, I use waterproof canvas, so that's completely up to you. The benefit of using woven is that it compresses really nicely in the bag, something that it takes a really long time, if ever, for waterproof canvas to do. The woven pieces that you would be using for this pattern would be the zipper pocket lining as well as the flap, if you opted to do that. So in the pattern, I say you can use a vinyl flap and use waterproof canvas lining for the flap lining, or you can use the interior and exterior of your flap in woven. And I'll talk about that more in a minute when we get to the exterior fabric use. But this is what you may or may not be using for woven, and this is definitely what you should use your woven with, because you're just really able to get your zipper pocket lining to lay nicely using woven versus using waterproof canvas. And what you want is you just really want that nice flat settled back panel, and that's what we get when we use woven. Both are interfaced with woven interfacing. Anytime I use a piece of woven, it is first fused with woven interfacing, and then I will continue to stabilize it further as I need to. Okay, for your exterior fabric, there are a lot of pieces that you need to cut, but this might look like a lot, but this is all cut out of one 18-inch roll, and this is the scrap that I have left. So it's doable, and that's even using a directional vinyl or printed exterior if you want to do that. If you want some help on maybe a cutting layout to use the most of your fabric, check out the projector file. I have it's sized to perfectly fit on a 24 by 36 cutting mat, and it's also laid out so that you can use either the most of your 18-inch roll, 18 by like 53-inch roll, or it's even good so that if you're using a full yard, you're not cutting directly upwards, you're cutting nicely horizontally, so that when you're done you still have a half yard section that's just really nicely left behind with minimal strange cutouts from it. So anyway, you can definitely get a whole exterior out of a directional 18-inch roll, so that's a bonus in my opinion. So in the pattern for the flap, I suggest that you use your vinyl. If you're making an all vinyl exterior and you're using vinyl for your flap, you just need to stabilize the exterior flap, the just basic flap. You just need to fuse the Decoville light, and then you would use waterproof canvas for your interior, and you don't need to fuse Decoville light to that. But I also suggest that if you're using woven for your flap, you use woven for both the exterior and the lining of your flap, and that's because I want you to fuse Decoville light to both, and I don't really like fusing Decoville to waterproof canvas. There is a fine line between fusing and melting, so I think it's just better to stick with woven for that, and I think that it just ages better as a woven flap when you have that extra bit of sturdiness in there that you get from from fusing Decovil Light to both the lining and the exterior. But for this one, even though in the pattern I say that you should use waterproof canvas for your flap lining, I'm going to go off the beaten path and I'm going to use a woven just because I'm making a themed bag and I want that fun interior flap that just kind of ties in my webbing as well as the theme to the bag. So that's what I'm going to do, and you can do that as well. I'm not going to fuse Decovil Light to it because I just don't think that it needs it. Having a vinyl flap is going to stand the test of time longer than a fully woven flap, but I just don't need it to be any more stabilized than it already is. I'm happy with how this will feel when it's all sewn up, so that's what I'm going to stick with. The main body panel and the back panel are both stabilized with foam, and a lot of people are afraid to use foam. They hate it. I hated it for a long time too, and I think it all boils down to just being able to properly fuse your foam to your fabric. So it really requires pressure and water. Spray or spritz it with water, that's what I suggest, over just plain steaming. And you need to spritz it more than you think that you do. And you need to put more pressure on it than you think that you do. So definitely, so spritz it, press it down with your iron or your press for 10 to 15 seconds in sections. And even with my steam press, I don't have water in the steam press, but I do spritz it first. Even with that, I still need to do it maybe a couple times. But the big key with foam is also letting it rest. You know, I've heard people say that Decovil Light needs to rest after it's been fused. In my experience, I haven't had to do that, but with foam, I do. If you get done fusing your foam and you go like this real quick, what's going to happen is you're just going to pull that glue right off and you're going to have to refuse it. So just let it settle for a second, let it cool down, you know, 15 seconds or so, and then give it a check. If you can peel it up at all, then you need to refuse it because it will just come off when you're sewing. So, or at some point, but you can see it's fully on there no matter where, even on the corners, which is the hardest part. And that's just using spritzing it and pressure and just making sure that it's fully fused. And having a fully fused piece of foam is going to make the world of a difference in the end result of your bag. So definitely take the time, take the annoyance, take the frustration, and get it on there now so that you don't have to worry about that later. Another note for the stabilizers, this is not part of the main body panel, but it is part of the back panel. So there is a strip of Decovil Heavy here on the back panel behind the foam, and I'm sure you're like, Shannon, why are you making it so thick right there? Because we get to add in straps and we get to add in a handle and a strap anchor on top of those already 3 thick layers of stuff, and I know that, but it really needs that stability. We've had a couple testers who used just Decovil Light instead of foam for the back, and it did not work out as well. If you were skipping the Decovil Heavy, what's going to happen is when you open the bag and the flap flips towards the back of the bag, it's going to push in that back panel too much, and it will cause the back of your bag to buckle inwards a little bit, and then it makes using the zipper pocket slightly inconvenient. So if your machine can handle it, I mean, this is what will make or break your experience with the bag. But as long as your machine can sew through it, it really creates a really nice feeling body to the bag, and it supports the flap, and at the end of the day you just have a better bag. The only issue is if you're sewing with a domestic and you're using thick materials for your strap, you're going to not have that fun of a time stitching over the back of the strap anchor when that time comes, because it can be very thick depending on the materials you're using. So this is where the intermediate advanced label comes into play, is knowing your materials, knowing your machine, and being aware ahead of time what the balance is between those things, and if your machine can handle it, so that you're not wasting materials, because it's the last thing I want to do. As with any pattern, the first step is going to be some prep work, but this one is just a little bit more involved because we need to allow ourselves some time for edge paint to dry fully before we construct certain parts of the bag. And I explain in the pattern that you can skip out on edge painting everything but this part that we're getting ready to do, which is the magnet bridge, because there's no sewing involved. You need to be able to fully adhere these two pieces together to become one. Your magnet is going to be placed centered, so you don't really have that much room to sew on either side of your magnet bridge. And it's just the way that I've designed it. Really, you need to be able to edge paint this piece. You can make an alternate method, that is your prerogative, but for the design, like I said, I do it this way, and if you're going to do it this way, you really need it to be the first thing that you do, so that as you continue to progress through the pattern, through the construction, you are able to apply additional layers, and then by the time that you get to your main panel, when we install the magnet bridge, you have had time to allow it to dry fully. On the center of one wrong side of your magnet bridge, you will mark a vertical center line, and you will also mark a vertical center line on the magnet bridge stabilizer. And this is really just so that you can make sure that you have it in the center, so that it's even. You want to make sure that it's centered vertically and horizontally. And so then you would take this to your machine take this to your iron or press and fuse that down so it's nice and adhered. Before I fused it on there, I traced the line with the pen just so that I can keep that center line. Don't be like me, don't use a removable ink pen, just use a regular pen to make that mark so that you don't have to just trace over it like I did. But after that, you would use your magnet washer and center it on that line. Make sure that it's as centered as possible. You can see that I fused my duck of a light on a little crooked, but it won't really make a difference. But it's just good to still eyeball the magnet marking, because that's what's going to determine how high up and how far up and down the magnet sits. So just get that on there and trace those lines, and then cut the slots for your magnet bridge, or for your female magnet piece. Okay. And then I just insert it through, making sure everything lines up nicely. So I want to move it down just a little bit more so that it's still centered. Didn't fully cut my vinyl. Here we go. Insert your washer and push the prongs to the side. You want it to be flat, so definitely push it to the side. And then I like to use some narrow duct tape. I buy this from Amazon. I think it's a ½ inch wide, and I found it really helpful for hardware. And then I just place it over there so that it is out of my sewing, but also protecting the other layer over time, so that those prongs aren't wearing down the back of the magnet bridge. Now that you have gotten your female magnet fully installed and it's centered both vertically and horizontally, you'll then need to adhere these two pieces together. You can use glue, spray adhesive, like fusible glue, I forget the name of it, or permanent double-sided tape. Like I said, you have a lot of options, but we're not sewing this piece. And since we're not sewing this piece, you want it to be fully and permanently adhered to one another, and the edge paint we're going to use after we get them put together is what's going to have that last bit of glue holding them together so they don't separate. And so it's also important that you're using good quality edge paint, and that you are edge painting enough layers to make sure that you're creating that nice like thick layer between the two, and it just makes that full bond between the two layers. So for me and my personal use, I don't have an issue sewing over even permanent double-sided tape on my industrial. I guess my machine, my needle and the amount of oil that is on there can handle it. So that's what I use. But you can always use glue, or however, whatever is best for you and your circumstance, just use that. But just make sure that you're fusing all the way to the edge. And I like to do one in the middle just for you know, security. So whatever it is, make sure that you know that it will work, you know that it will stay, and you know that you can sew over it. So remove the double-sided tape backing and press these two together. If you hand cut these pieces, you're probably going to have to trim them up a little bit. Now that it is nice and even on either side, just again fully press it. If you have a seam roller, roll the seam. Just really make sure that it's now one complete unit. And so we will set this aside for now. So next up is the drawstring slider. You will need both pieces. And in similar fashion to the magnet bridge, we're going to apply some double-sided tape along the center and put them wrong sides together. Just make sure that you're keeping your tape at least 1/8 of an inch away from any edge. So remove your tape and place your two pieces wrong sides together. And really press it down and match it all up. We're going to leave long tails and sew around the perimeter all the way around. Leave long tails. Then we will pull both of those tails to the wrong side of your piece, and then knot and either melt if you're using bonded thread or glue, or however you secure your threads to keep them nicely hidden from the outside of your bag but also secure on the inside. You do that for your drawstring slider. So I'm going to go sew around this perimeter, and then we'll check back in to knot them up. Okay, all finished stitching the drawstring slider. As I instruct you in the pattern, make sure that you're pulling your top thread to the bobbin side of your beginning stitch before you complete the top stitching. So now that we've done that, you pull the finishing stitch to the back side, and then you will knot it and either melt or glue the thread depending on the type of thread that you're doing. So I will do that. My stitching isn't perfect, but that's okay, because what I'll do is I'll pick my better side and that will be the one that shows on the front. The other one will be tucked inside the drawstring anchor or drawstring slider, and then you'll never see it. But I am going to go around the edge and just clean up those two edges all the way around to make sure that they are as flat and straight as they can be. I did hand cut my pieces, so that's why they're a little irregular, but that's okay. Alright, now that you have assembled your magnet bridge and your drawstring slider, you will edge paint all of these pieces. And that is your zipper overlay, your bridge overlay, your drawstring slider, your magnet bridge, and your slip pocket binding. So for the magnet bridge, you don't need to edge paint these sides here. They're going to be tucked into the bag. No one's going to see it, but you do want to edge paint the full edge of the top and the bottom. So I will get to edge painting these, and as we progress, I'm not going to show me adding layers on, but I will pause every once in a while and I will just apply a layer as I needed to. In the pattern, I instruct you to edge paint everything first, and then we get started infusing and prepping. And so as you've seen earlier when I gave you a preview of the pieces and just explained what's what, you saw that I had already fused everything. So now is the time in the pattern where you would first do all the markings so that you can center your interfacings as needed, and then you'll go back in and put even more markings on there. And they're pretty important to at least get them done now so that you aren't trying to find the center of something while it's bulky, or trying to measure down a certain amount when it's in a shape versus a flat piece of fabric. So I will leave the pattern to explain to you the different little bits of fusing and markings that need to be done, and then we'll get started on the next step of construction. The first step in the actual construction of the backpack is going to be the flap. You should have placed a marking on the lining for your magnet placement if you are using a standard magnet. If you're using a custom magnet, I do say that you should put it on the front. So another note before we move on, if you have used a print for the lining or for the exterior, one thing to keep note of is that your flap will be pointed down like this. So if you're using a directional print, make sure that it is pointing in the right direction for the exterior, and when it opens up, it'll be like this. So make sure, again, it's in the right direction for the print that you're using. So you also need the fusible fleece, the male portion of your magnet, or if you're using a custom magnet, you'll need that whole magnet now. You'll also need the washer if you're using a standard magnet, and then a scrap of Decavolite or fusible fleece, plus another scrap of Decavolite if you're using a standard magnet. If you are using a standard magnet, you can just use your basic washer for this, but because with custom magnets I don't use a washer in between the male part of that magnet where that gets installed, this is my washer, so that's what I'm going to use. Just use that and mark the fusible fleece in the center so that you know where to cut the slots where the magnet prongs will be inserted through. And then go ahead and just cut those little slots. You do that same process that you did on the fusible fleece or Decavolite on the lining of your flap as well. You just place your washer, center the hole over the dot that you, or the mark that you made, trace the markings, and then cut the holes, or the slots. And then you would insert the magnet into those two slots. And then you'd put the washer on top of it. And then you would put the fusible fleece on top of that. And then you would fold both of those prongs outward. And then after that, I'd suggest that you use a piece of Decavolite to further protect the flap exterior from those metal bits over time. That is all personal preference. Some people don't have that issue, but I like to do it just for security's sake. But because I'm using a custom magnet, I'm actually going to skip these steps. What I'm going to do is just wait. I'm going to pretend as if I already have a magnet installed, which of course I don't, but I can install all of this later. It's not a crazy big deal. So I will place these two right sides together and clip around the edge. Alright, so I've set my hardware aside for now. I've clipped my my flap lining and my flap exterior to be right sides together. And then I will take it to the machine, and I will, starting on one side or the other, doesn't really matter, you will stitch around this edge using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch on either end, and don't use too short of a stitch length for depending on the vinyl that you're using, or cork, but also don't make it too long so that you get those nice rounded edges as you go. So I'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll check back in for the next step. As I said, we just stitched around this edge here. We did not stitch around this straight edge. We left that open so that we have a way to turn the flap right side out. And then we will trim this seam allowance down using pinking shears so that we can maintain this these nice curves we have on the flap. Alright, now we've trimmed that edge with pinking shears, and it's time to turn it right side out. Okay, make sure that your corners have been, or your rounded edges have been pushed out as far as they will go. Since the Decoville light is further in than that seam that you sewn, it's about a ½ inch in when you just sewed a 3/8 inch, you have some room, and it shouldn't cause any issues with you as far as pushing out this seam. So then take this to the iron and get it nice and flat. That way you have a perfect smooth edge to top stitch. And then I will check back in. Now that you have pressed your flap and you have nice crisp edges, go ahead and top stitch around the perimeter of this shape using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. I like to start here in the middle and just go all the way around and work my way back to that starting point, and that way I don't really have to backstitch too much because all of that stitching will be locked in because it's right there in that middle center point. Wait! Stop! If I just told you to sew all the way around the perimeter and you're using a custom magnet, don't do that. Only sew around maybe a backstitch here and there. Don't be like me. I'm on a deadline, so I can't really refilm all this. So I'm just going to tell you that you need to be able to reach into your bag if you're doing a custom magnet. If you were doing a standard magnet, that would have been perfect. That's what I call for in the pattern. But for a custom magnet, you are going to be installing your magnet now, because there is a chance that if you did it first, what would happen is your magnet would have been too close to the edge and it would have been impossible to sew. So you need to open this back up if I told you incorrectly, which I did, and then I'll show you how I install a custom magnet now. For the custom magnet, just like you did for the standard magnet, you need to center that hole over where the washer would go, or the back plate, over the mark that you made for the magnet. Now, you need to keep in mind whether or not your magnet plate or shape is symmetrical. If it's asymmetrical and you place it down with the back plate face down like you kind of intuitively want to do, you're going to potentially, if the holes are not symmetrical for the screws, then you're going to be punching holes opposite than what you need. That's kind of hard to explain, but you'll know if you have an asymmetrical magnet, and let's say you have a screw here, here, and here, and you place the magnet face down, or the back plate face down, and you punch a hole here, here, and here, what's going to happen is that when you flip it around to the back, you're going to have holes here, here, and here, and you're supposed to have them opposite of that. So just keep it in mind. Every magnet is different. These are people and artists designing these, and so they're going to make what's best for installation and the art. So they're individual. They're not standard. They change and vary from magnet to magnet. So just make sure that you have it centered. You'll see it'll fit quite nicely on this flap. This flap and the magnet placement is actually pretty good for custom magnets because it gives you a good amount of space to use large and small ones. Alright, now that I have figured out where I want it to be, I'm going to mark for the screw holes. And using the front plate, I will determine which hole punch size I need to punch the hole big enough that these screw casings, as I call them, these things that protrude from the front plate, can go through the flap. You want them to fully go through, and you want the fabric around here to be what is supporting the bag, and then the screws will go up against the plate, or will hold the plate against those casings, so that again, it's the fabric around those holes that's taking all of the force, because that's ultimately really what you need. The screws are only there to hold the back plate in, so that everything stays sturdy. So I'm going to go ahead and punch these holes. And then we'll do a test fit just to see. And as you can see, it fits quite nicely on there. Now that we know exactly where the magnet's going to be, because we punched the holes and it's in there, we will then turn it over and put the back plate on there, and use that back plate again as a guide to trace the lines that you need to cut into slots so that you can insert your magnet. And this is where opening up that top edge comes into play. So you can remove the front plate and then cut these holes into your lining carefully again. So because of the way that custom magnets are designed, the magnet isn't getting pushed against your fabric edges really, it's just getting inserted through the fabric. But all of the brunt is going around the fabric, around those casings, pressed in there, and then anytime your magnet shifts, it's just hitting the slots on the metal plate. But I still like to insert the fusible fleece just for my own sake. It just makes me feel better. So I do that. So you put the magnet through the back plate, you put the back plate, those prongs through those holes you just cut, and then it's very finicky to do this next part, but if you can manage, go for it. I'm reaching in and I'm just pressing the fusible fleece onto those two slots. Okay, that fusible fleece is on there, and so while I'm in there, I'm going to fold those prongs down so that I lock in that position there. And then I will insert the front plate into the front, and then match up those holes, and then I will put some Loctite in on these screws. If you're using this Loctite, you need to be very careful because it is red and it can come out quite easily. And then screw it on. Try not to spill your Loctite, and then go wash your hands to get any red off, and then we'll also wipe any extra Loctite off the screws. But that sucker's in there and we're ready to move on. If you were using a custom magnet and you did not finish stitching this, I have knotted mine. You can sew across this edge right here to close that up, just so it's a little easier for you when it comes time for the back panel assembly. But you can also leave it like this and it won't be the end of the world. I did not hit record when I showed you how I prepped the handle and straps for sewing, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Thankfully I caught that and the drawstring instructions was there, so I didn't have to record that. So again, you should have your strap piece available, and we're going to actually repeat the same part of the same process for the handle. So have both of them available right now, and what you'll do is apply a 1/4 inch double-sided tape just about 1/8 of an inch in from the long edge of your straps and your handle, just like this. So you should have folded in the edges to that center line. Again, you should be doing it for 2 straps, not just the one that I'm showing you as an example. But then once you get done doing that on both straps, then fold them in again so that those 2 folded edges meet. It should fold quite nicely along that seam, and then you'll clip along that double folded edge. So you should repeat that process for both straps. Both straps should have this double folded edge clipped along the length. You could use double-sided tape to do that second fold, but I just preferred to clip this one. The less double-sided tape that I have to sew over, the better, but it's completely up to you. For the handle, the next step would be to place a strip of 1/4-inch double-sided tape right above that seam where the 2 raw edges meet. And then you would remove this double-sided tape backing and then center it over your webbing. So after you have finished prepping your handle and your straps, then you would go to the machine and you would top stitch the bottom 3 edges using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. You don't have to stitch across the top, but if you'd like to, you're welcome. The top of about the top 1.5 inches of this is going to be tucked inside the strap anchor, so you'll be locking in those stitches that way. But you're going to want to pivot once you hit this bottom corner. Give yourself still a 1/8 inch seam allowance, and then once you hit about 1/8 of an inch on this other corner, pivot again, and then continue to sew back up the length. So you'll do that with both straps. For the handle, you will just top stitch 1/8 inch around the whole edge, just to make sure that the webbing stays locked in where it's supposed to be. For the drawstring, in the prep section, I do give you a little bit of a tip on how to find the center line of the drawstring. It is a bit of a funky size, so it does make it a little hard to find the center. So I just instruct you to pretend as if it's 1.5 inches wide, and then you would find the center of that. So I just use my grid for reference. I find 2 lines that are going to give me 1.5 inches, so it would be this bottom line and this row of dots right here. And then I will use a 3/4 inch marking on my ruler and align that 3/4 inch marking on my ruler right there along one of the edges of the 1.5 inch line, and that will give me the center of the drawstring. So that is one of those things where it's probably a little easier to understand while doing it than it is to read or watch the instructions for it, but if you just do what I said, you should be able to find the center of your drawstring. Once you have found the center of the drawstring, you will use your 1/8 inch double-sided tape and place it along either long raw edge. Now that you have ran that 1/8 inch tape right along the edge, not 1/8 of an inch in like we did on the straps and the handle, but right along the edge, then you'll remove that double-sided tape backing and then align it along that center line, just like we did for the straps and the handle. Once you have matched up the both edges to that center line as best as you can, then run another strip of 1/8 inch double-sided tape right along that center seam on one side. Remove that double-sided tape and pinch them to enclose that raw edge. Okay, I just pressed it together, and then I ran some clips along the edge just to further keep that fold where it is, since I'm not experiencing any twisting right now. So I will then take this to the machine, and I'm going to start with long tails and leave long tails at the end of my stitching, and top stitch this folded edge here where both of those folded edges meet up along that edge using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. And the reason for leaving the long tails is just so that you're not backstitching too far up into your strap, because when you're all said and done and you put the cord ends on your drawstrings, you don't want to have back stitched up and back down, and then you can see where your back stitching was in case it wasn't neat. So it's just kind of a nice little way to keep it tidy and clean for the end result. Alright, I've just finished stitching along that double folded edge using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. I did leave long tails, so I will pull them to the back and knot them. Alright, and now your drawstring is finished. Alright, good job. Now that you have sewn up your straps, you may have an urge to edge paint the bottom of the straps. I suggest waiting until the end of the back panel assembly for that, because after we're done with the back panel assembly, that's going to sit aside for a while. Your drawstring won't be used for a bit either, so you can tuck that away in your basket, if you will. But the handle and the straps we'll be using here shortly, so don't put them too far away. The next step in the construction process are the webbing connectors. For this you'll need both triangles and both strips of webbing. Up from one of the bottom edges, draw a horizontal line that is a 1/2 inch up from that bottom edge. The next step will be to fold your webbing connector together, right sides together, just like this. And you can go ahead and clip this in place. Then you will insert your webbing along this fold on the inside, and you just want it to pop out and align that edge of the webbing connector with that 1/2 inch line that you drew. And then clip that in place. Alright, now that you have done that for both pieces, we will take this to the machine, and 3/8 of an inch away from this edge here, you will stitch right across from this fold all the way to this angled edge. And you'll do that for both webbing connectors. So I knew I would forget to hit record again, so here we are. We did sew 3/8 inch away from this edge right here. We backstitched on either end, and then according to the pattern we also went in right next to that, inside of that seam allowance, and we stitched right next to it just to further support that webbing and to take the pressure off of that outside seam. And then we went in and we trimmed away the bulk. You can see here that I angled my scissors in right at kind of the edge of the webbing. I cut it along this edge right there, making sure I did not cut into the webbing at all. I did the same for the back side, and then I trimmed it and matched it up there. So we'll do that again, this time while recording. Okay, now that we have trimmed both of them down, all we'll do is just pull it right side out and then clip it. Now that we have turned it right side out and we've clipped everything nice and even, we're just going to trim this seam allowance down. I like to angle my scissors in just a little bit, making sure I'm not cutting directly into those stitches, but I am kind of angling it in towards that connector. Now that we've trimmed away that seam allowance, we will just take it to the machine and stitch 1/8 of an inch away from all 3 edges. Alright, we have just finished top stitching around those 3 edges. And now we will insert a rivet here. So in the pattern, I instruct you to measure about a 1/2 inch in from that corner and place a mark for a rivet hole. After you've placed your marks, go ahead and punch that hole and insert and set your rivets. Alright, now your webbing connectors are finished and we can move on to the back panel assembly. For the back panel assembly, you will need your back panel, your assembled flap, your assembled webbing connectors, your prepared straps, your handle, and your strap anchor. On the strap anchor, I instruct you to draw a line a ½ inch in from either short edge of the strap anchor, and that is to give you a guide in which to place your double-sided tape so that you're not placing it into the seam allowance of the sides of the back panel. And so what we'll do is just place double-sided tape along either side of that center line within those side lines. We'll remove the double-sided tape backing, and then we will fold it in to meet that center line like we did for the handle and the straps. On the flap, you need to mark the center of this top straight edge. In the prep section for the back panel, you were instructed to draw 2 horizontal lines on the right side. In the back panel assembly section, you were just instructed to draw a vertical line, a vertical center line between those two. Now you also need to draw a vertical line 1/2 inch away from either side of that center vertical line. Now with the strap anchor, you will align one of the folded edges with the bottom horizontal line, and you can clip it in place. I like to clip up top. Alternatively, you could place a strip of 1/8 double-sided tape along that line, and then you could press down your strap anchor on top of that to secure it. Now that you have secured your strap anchor one way or the other, you will take it to the machine and just top stitch along this bottom edge using a 1/8 inch seam allowance, making sure that you're back stitching on either edge. On the straight edge of the lining side of your flap, apply a strip of 1/8 inch double-sided tape. Now remove the double-sided tape and fold the strap anchor back, and then place your flap centered on the back panel right along that top line. I always like to measure to make sure that it's even on both sides. Now that you have got it centered and right along that line, just take it to the machine and baste this on using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can see that I have basted on the flap, and now it's going to be time to install the handle and the straps. So we're going to do that at the machine so that you can see how I hold everything as I sew and just the order in which I sew things. But before we go to the machine, I just want to point out that when I place the handles and the straps into the strap anchor, I'm not going to be placing it as far up against this stitch line down here as I can, because you'll see that that's going to create quite a kind of bump there from that bulk. So if you just push it up just slightly, maybe like a 1/16 of an inch, you will have just slightly less of a bulge there. You're still going to have bulk, but it will be just less than it would be if you really pressed it right up against that bulge and just accentuated that bump there. So again, about a 1/16 of an inch away from the flap, when the flap is fully folded back, is about where you want to be. And so when I'm at the machine, every time that I place the handle edge or a strap edge down, that's about the distance I'm going to be placing it. I apologize, the light at my machine is not the greatest, so hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm doing. But again, I'm just placing the handle right side down, like vinyl side down, and I'm aligning it right with that first horizontal stitch or horizontal line of the 3, and I'm making sure it's just about a 1/16 of an inch away from the stitch line of that the bottom stitch line of the strap anchor. So now I'm going to baste it on, and I'm going to continue sewing until I reach that center line that I drew. Once I've reached that center line, then I'm going to fold down the handle, making sure that I'm making a nice loop and I'm not twisting it. The webbing should be pointing up, and I'm going to place it just on the outside of that 3rd line. And I'm going to continue to baste across. Now that I have placed my handle down, I'm going to use the edge of my handle as my guide for placing my straps down. You really want to make sure that you are not basting down the edge that you top stitched across. You want to make sure that you're basting down the edge without that top stitching. Now continue to sew again until you reach that center line, and then place the other strap just outside of the other end or other half of the handle. Now that you have everything basted on, you will run a strip of 1/4 inch double-sided tape along all of that. You can follow this line that you drew as a guide. Just make sure that you're keeping it out of the side seam allowances so that you're not sewing over any extra double-sided tape. Pull that double-sided tape backing off and just fold it down and press it over. And I like to just clip it down even further. Now that we have the strap anchor pressed down, we will now top stitch 1/8 inch away from these 3 edges. Follow the edge of the back panel for the side top stitching, not the edge of the strap anchor. One final note is just to make sure that you are being very careful. My Juki 1541 can handle this seam without any issue. The only thing that I have to do sometimes, depending on the material, is lengthen my stitch more, but I don't skip any stitches and I don't have any issues with my needle going through all of these layers. It's very thick, but you need that stability there to support the flap when the bag is open. It really does make a difference. I've had testers who have substituted Decovil Light for the foam in the back, and it just didn't turn out the same way. You can always play with the amount of layers that are here. You can try alternate strap installation methods. You can use a different material for the flap. You can do a whole lot of things. You can change the way the straps are made. You can just use webbing for the straps, but as I've written it in the pattern, this is the biggest part that makes it not domestic friendly, so you just need to be aware and be careful. Alright, the hard part is out of the way. So now we just need to trim down the sides of the strap anchor to make it in line with the back panel. And now it's time to install some rivets. So in the pattern, I instruct you to measure up 3/4 of an inch from this bottom edge here. And what I say in the pattern is that for this part, we're looking for consistency horizontally in height versus the distance between rivets. So the eye is not going to really catch that these two are maybe just slightly further apart than these two over here, but it will catch if this one's high and this one's low and this one's in the middle and that one is perfectly centered. So the point is that you're just guiding the eye along those 4 points in a nice straight way. So just measure up 3/4 of an inch from this bottom edge here and make rivet marks centered between each part, so at each handle and each strap. Now that you have made your marks, the next step will be to punch your rivet holes. Again, these are extremely thick seams, so you have a lot of punching to do. If you're using something like a screw hole punch, it's going to be hard to get through all the layers with that. If you're using a handheld punch, it might be a little difficult, but the harder part will be reaching inwards far enough. My preference for this seam is just using my hammer and a hole punch like this. I just have gotten the best results, and that's just my preference. Now that you have punched all 4 holes, try not to be like me and hammer your finger, but go ahead and insert those 4 rivets and set those 4 rivets. This is when you may need the longer post length depending on your material choices and your ability to press down, and also your rivets. So this is just one of those situations where you really need to use your sewing experience to give you the best results. Alright, we've set all 4 rivets, and now it will be time to attach the webbing connectors. So in the pattern I instruct you to measure up a 1/2 inch from each bottom edge, and then you mark that within the seam allowance, and then you will just align the bottom corner of your webbing connector with that line that you drew and clip in place. Alright, now that you have basted on your webbing connectors, your back panel is finished. If you want, you can edge paint these raw edges of your straps. You can roll up your webbing to keep them out of the way, and you can, I like to sew on my logo label on the back of most of my bags, and I found that like a 1/2 inch down and centered from the strap anchor is my preference for this particular bag. But other than that, you can set your back panel aside and we can move on to the lining. Now that we're moving on to the lining, the first part of the lining that we're going to take care of is the zipper pocket. That is located on the back panel of your lining, so what you'll need is your lower back lining, your zipper overlay piece that's already been edge painted, your number 5 zipper tape, your number 5 zipper pull, and your zipper pocket lining that has been interfaced with woven interfacing. The first step will be to baste the number 5 zipper tape onto your zipper pocket lining, and so you will place your zipper pocket lining face up or right side up on your work surface, and then place the zipper tape right side up on top of that along that top edge. And then you will take this to your machine and baste 1/8 of an inch away from that top edge. Now that you have basted this top edge, you will fold up the bottom edge of that zipper pocket lining to meet the other edge of that zipper tape and clip. And then you will baste this edge using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Alright, now that we have basted both sides of the zipper tape onto the zipper pocket lining, I do suggest in the pattern that you press this fairly flat, just so that when it comes time to place your zipper overlay on your pocket, you have a nice flat surface to work with. So now that we're done with that, we're going to move on to the zipper pocket overlay. On the wrong side of your zipper pocket overlay, you will place 2 parallel strips of 1/8 inch double-sided tape in the middle of the longer sections. The important thing is to keep it about 1/8 of an inch in from either edge, so from the inside of the rectangle and from the outside of the rounded rectangle, as well as at least 1/8 of an inch in from the shorter edges as well. You want to be able to sew all the way around the perimeter of the outside and that internal rectangle without hitting any of your double-sided tape. Once you have applied your double-sided tape, go ahead and remove the outer backings and leave the inner strips with the backing on for now. In the prep section of your lower back lining, you should have traced the rectangle from your pattern piece. And so now you should take your zipper overlay and center it right over that rectangle so that you have nice placement. Alright, now that you have your zipper pocket overlay on your lower back lining, you will sew around the outside edge of the zipper pocket overlay using between 1/8 of an inch and 1/16 of an inch seam allowance. It's important to start with long tails and then try to finish your stitching in the same hole that you started with, and leave long tails at the end so that you can knot them together to secure your stitching. Alright, now that you have sewn around this outside edge and you have secured your threads, we'll need to trim away the lower back lining from behind that stitch line. So you will cut into your lower back lining You will be trimming and leaving between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 inch really of the lower back lining. Just really be careful that you don't cut into your zipper overlay. Alright, now that you have trimmed the lower back lining from behind that zipper overlay, you can remove the double-sided tape backings like I've already done. And then now that your zipper pocket lining is nice and flat, shouldn't be too hard to adhere this zipper pocket overlay over your zipper tape. So I like to just press it down and eyeball it first, and then I adjust from there. But what I do to make sure that it's centered is I just hold on to either edge of the zipper pocket overlay, and I try to place my fingers exactly on the same position on each side, and then I just feel where that edge of the zipper tape hits my finger. And so as long as they're relatively close, there is room for error here. So don't obsess over it too much, but you do want it to be as centered as you can make it without giving yourself too big of a headache. Now that we have finished centering our zipper teeth under our zipper pocket overlay, you will need to flip the zipper pocket lining up so that it's fully out of the way, and you're just stitching through this upturned zipper pocket lining. You will stitch along this bottom edge here using the same seam allowance you used for the outer edge, but this time you're going to leave long tails again, but you will start about 1/8 of an inch before this short edge and finish about 1/8 of an inch after this short edge. After you're done doing that, you will pull those long tails through the back side and then knot them and secure them, and then we'll check back in. As you can see, I have stitched just about 1/8 of an inch away from either short edge. I don't have any back stitching there because I pulled my long tails to the back, I knotted them, and then melted them. So now you can fold your zipper pocket lining back down. Make sure that you get a nice crisp fold here on this bottom edge. And then take it to your iron and just give it a nice press, so that you're just working with the flattest surface that you can, since we are top stitching and we want it to be as neat as possible. That just makes your life easier. Alright, we have pressed everything nice and flat so that it's easier to work with, and now we can insert our zipper pull onto our tape. It doesn't really matter which side that you insert it from. I just prefer to insert it from the right so that I'm opening it by sliding it to the right and closing it by sliding it to the left. That's just my preference. Once you insert your zipper pull on, make sure that you still have that nice cut edge and that you're not getting a funky gap between your zipper teeth opening here and your zipper pull. If it's crooked, you'll see that one side has a larger hump than the other. It just looks a lot nicer if you can have it be even, and you can always tell that you've inserted onto your tape evenly by just making sure that you still have that nice edge there that you cut when you cut your zipper tape. So just zip it on and zip it about 1 inch or 2 past this window here, or the edge of that window. And then just make sure that your placement of your zipper overlay is still nice and straight over your teeth. And then you will start in this hole here that you finished in. And again, using the same seam allowance. It might be a little bit further out on the shorter edges because you're meeting up with wherever you started and stopped. But just try to stay consistent by ending and starting in these 2 outer holes, needle holes, and then just stitch here, pivot, stitch down the length. Once you get close to your zipper pull, zip it, lift up your foot, zip it past. Once it's past your foot, place it back down, and then zip again, or then sew again down the rest of this edge, and then down to that last needle hole. Make sure you're leaving long tails when you're not back stitching, and when you're done, pull all the threads to the back, and then knot them and secure them. And then we can move on to sewing up the sides of the zipper pocket. Alright, as you can see, we just finished stitching those 3 edges, and what I will do is pull these threads to the back and then knot them and secure them. Alright, now that we have finished up trimming our threads and finishing that stitching, all we need to do now is to sew up this side. So you will take this to your machine, and I just like to start right under the zipper teeth, but I will sew a 3/8 inch seam allowance down here from under the teeth all the way down to the fold, and then I will back stitch on either at the start and the end of my stitch line, and I'll do that for both sides. Now we have finished stitching up these sides to fully close up our zipper pocket. So now we will just trim this seam allowance down. I like to trim it to around 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit shorter. Just when you're done doing that, make sure that you remelt these edges of your zipper tape so it doesn't fray at all. Now we have trimmed up and remelted these edges of our zipper tape, and it is time to move on to the slip pocket. For the slip pocket construction, you will need your lower main lining, your slip pocket, and your slip pocket binding. And if you're going to add a woven tag into the binding, go ahead and grab that as well. On the wrong side of your slip pocket, you were to draw 2 lines along these 2 edges, and now we'll use those lines as our guide to place down our double-sided tape. You'll be using your 1/8 inch double-sided tape for this, and you will place it down just inside that 1 inch, so between the 1 inch edge and the edge of the fabric. Now you see I'm not applying it all the way towards the edges because that's where I will be stitching, so I want to make sure I'm keeping it out of my stitch line as much as possible. Remove the double-sided tape backing and fold over that raw edge to meet that vertical line. Now that you have done that, you want to fold it up on itself so that those folded in pieces are on the sides, not the top and the bottom. And then you will take this to your iron and press this as flat as you can. Now that you have pressed it nice and flat, you will baste along this top edge here, catching both of those folds. And then if you want to place a woven tag, I normally place it just about here so that it's on the right hand side of my slip pocket. But you are welcome to place your woven tag wherever you like. Now that you have basted that top edge, along that top edge, right over that baseline on both the front and the back, apply 1/4 inch double-sided tape along this edge. Just make sure that you're going to keep it about 1/8 of an inch inside from this folded edge, so that while you're top stitching these bottom 3 edges, you're not catching the double-sided tape in your stitching. Now you will take your slip pocket binding and you are going to draw a center line along the length of the binding. Now you will remove the double-sided tape backing from the back of the slip pocket, and you will align it on the wrong side of the slip pocket binding and right up against that line that you just drew. Then you will remove the front double-sided tape backing and fold it over to encase that raw edge. Now that you have folded over this binding piece, you may notice that your back binding dips a little bit lower than your front binding. That's okay. It would be an issue if it was the other way around. So now we will just take it to the machine and stitch 1/8 of an inch away from this bottom edge of the front of the binding on the front. Lots of fronts and backs there. Make sure that you backstitch neatly on either end so that we don't ever lose those stitches in the binding, and then we'll check back in. We have just finished doing this top stitch right here, and so now we're going to apply some double-sided tape to the bottom 3 edges of this slip pocket so that we can attach it to our lower main lining piece and make sure that when we sew it on, it stays put. So I apply it right along the edge of this slip pocket. You shouldn't be able to see the double-sided tape from the front, but it should be right as close to the edge as you can get it, so that while you're sewing your 1/8 inch seam allowance around the edge of this slip pocket, you're not catching the double-sided tape. Now, don't substitute anything wider than 1/8 inch double-sided tape, because if you do, you will be sewing directly over it. On your lower main lining, you are instructed to draw a horizontal line that is 1 inch up from the bottom edge and centered. So go ahead and do that now. Once you've drawn that horizontal line, you can remove the double-sided tape backing from the back of your slip pocket, and you can center the slip pocket right over that line that you just drew. Now you would take this to your machine, and starting right up under that folded edge of the binding, you will just top stitch 1/8 inch around these bottom 3 edges of the slip pocket. Okay, we have top stitched these bottom 3 edges, so you can pull those threads to the back if you want now, or you can wait until after we've done the next 2 lines for the pen slots. The next step will be to draw the pen slots. So that will be 1.5 inches away from that top stitch line is where you will use your removable ink pen to draw a line vertically. So it's 1.5 and 3 inches from that stitch line. And I like to draw all the way up until where I'm going to stitch, which is just past my stitch line. Now that you have drawn those 2 lines, we'll take it to the machine and you will stitch that length of the vertical line that you just drew. Make sure that you're back stitching neatly and leave long tails so that you can pull all those threads to the back and have a really nice clean finish on your slip pocket. Now that you have finished those 2 vertical lines, go ahead and trim. Pull all of your threads to the back and then trim them down. Alright, now that you have cleaned up all your threads, you've made your individual pockets, it's time to set the rivets. So I just tell you in the pattern for you to use a pen to make some rivet markings. So you'll do right next to your stitch line on the sides, centered, and right above the stitch line, the 2 stitch lines that you just did. So then we will punch holes in those marks and then insert and set rivets. Before I set these, I just wanted to make note that if you have any Decoville Light scraps, go ahead and put them behind your rivets if you'd like. I just think that it helps stabilize that rivet just a little bit more, and you don't really have to worry about it ever popping through, though that's not really a concern with waterproof canvas for the most part. And we've already stitched these lines, so even if a rivet did pop through, your stitches will still keep your pocket in place, but we never like to rely on those kinds of things. So I just like to suggest that you add in some Decoville Light. So now we will press these rivets and your slip pocket will be finished. So now your slip pocket is finished, and I just wanted to give you a scale of this pocket here. So my phone is being used to record, so this is my case for my phone. The pocket may seem a little small, but once you actually put it to use, it fits what it's meant to hold quite nicely. Okay, now it is time to do the lining assembly. For that, you will need your assembled lower back lining, assembled lower main lining, your upper back lining, upper main lining, your base lining, your drawstring, and your 2 drawstring stabilizers. The first step will be to place your lower main lining face up on your work surface, and then place your upper main lining face down on top of that along this top edge. And so I will then just clip this in place, and then we will stitch along this top edge using a 3/8 inch seam allowance, making sure that we back stitch on either end. Alright, we have sewn this 3/8 inch seam right here. Then we'll flip this up, and then we will press this seam down nice and flat. I gave it a quick press over at my iron, and now we will top stitch on the waterproof canvas side along this seam using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Alright, we've just finished top stitching this right here. This was 1/8 inch from this top folded edge on the waterproof canvas side. That seam allowance is pointing towards the bottom of the lower main lining so that we made sure that we caught it in our top stitching. And then we can set this aside and then repeat that same process with the lower back lining. Just make sure that your zipper pull is out of the way, and this one should be just a little bit easier because it's a shorter seam. But again, after you stitch this 3/8 inch line, also make sure that you press that seam allowance towards the bottom of the lower back lining, and then you will top stitch on the waterproof canvas side, and then we will check back in for the next step. We have just finished doing that top stitch there after sewing that seam. I'm going to tuck my zipper into my zipper pocket just so that I don't have any accidents at any point while sewing the sides or anything like that. Just keeps it safely out of the way. And then on the wrong side of the upper back lining, I'm going to measure in 1.5 inches from the sides, and starting at 1/2 inch up from the bottom, I'm going to draw a vertical line. So I'm going to measure in 1.5 inches, and I'm going to measure up 1 inch just so that I can follow my ruler for that scant 1/2 inch line. So that's going to be right here, and I'm starting that 1/2 inch up from the bottom and 1.5 inches over from the side. You can make this line straight or you can make it slanted. I just tend to make mine slanted. Really, it doesn't matter at the end of the day, but whichever you'd like to do. Now that you've drawn your two lines, you need to take a blade or some scissors and carefully cut that line. So I have drawn that full 1/2 inch line, but really you only need to cut about a scant 1/2 inch, so just a hair shorter than that. You can always open it up a little bit more, but you cannot put it back together once you've cut it too far. So I like to kind of start just below that edge and not cut all the way to the bottom. Using a sharp blade here is super helpful. This is a fresh blade. So as you can see, I've cut two lines. Those are not 1/2 inch lines. Those are just about 3/8 inch. I know that I will have to cut them just a little bit bigger when it comes time to insert the drawstring, but like I said, I just like to start out small and then trim little bit by little bit as I need it to perfectly fit my drawstring. Now different drawstrings are going to have different materials are going to have different thicknesses and may require you to open it up that full 1/2 inch or even more, but you just need to do it on a per material basis. So starting out with the size that I had mentioned is probably the best bet, and then opening it up just a little bit more is all you can do from there. Now that we have cut our slots, go ahead and extend this center line down so that you can use it as a reference for centering your drawstring. Alright, next step will be to find the center of your drawstring. I just laid it on my cutting mat and found the center that way. Next we will insert the drawstring into those two slots that we made. So if you want your stitching to end up to where when you've cinched the bag, the top stitching and the folded edge point to the outsides of the bag, not like this, then when you insert your drawstring, you need to make sure that the folded edge is pointing towards the bottom, not the top. Alright, now that you have cut those slots and you've marked the center of your drawstring, you need to insert it into this slot that you cut. Make sure that you're doing it gently so that you aren't putting any extra pressure onto that cut edge. I did have to open mine up just a tiny bit more, and so I am going to slide that through to the back, and then I'm going to slide it back out through the front, and I'm going to make sure that I'm not twisting anything along the way. Make sure that this back edge gets pushed so that it's nice and flat, like that. And then you will pull your drawstring to align with that center line right there. And then making sure that your drawstring stabilizer pieces do not go past the top of that edge of Decoville light there. You will stabilize both of these centered over that back seam, but again, not crossing over that top edge of Decoville light. This might take a little bit of effort. You might need to do one side first, then press the other side, then press it all. But it's really important to fuse this down fully so that we are able to make sure that there's no opening to the back of the bag if you were to lift this up. All right? We're going to further secure this with stitches and a rivet, but for now, this is important to do. Again, not only to close up the bag, but it also will help support that rivet, and it will help support our stitches. Okay, now that we have fused that Decoville light to the back of that drawstring insertion, it will be time to secure it with top stitching. So essentially what we'll be doing is a really neat back stitch, and what I walk you through in the pattern is just starting here and then stitching down the height of the drawstring. But as you back stitch again, you stay in every needle hole until you hit your first stitch needle insertion, and then you will go back and end in that last hole, and then pull all the threads to the back and knot them. And you'll do the same on both sides. And it's important for visually, it's just prettier when you're able to stay in the same holes, but also you don't want to perforate your vinyl if you're using a vinyl that can happen to. So you just need to be careful and stay inside those holes as you can. So I will take you to the machine and show you just how I do it. Alright, so following that cut edge and using a 1/8 inch seam allowance, I'm going to slowly stitch 1, 2, 3. I'm not sure if you can see that. You probably can't. But now that I have done that stitching there, I'm going to reverse. I like to hand crank just to make sure. And then I will go forward one more time and make sure I'm ending in that same needle hole. For the other side, I will do the same. Try to start right in the same position I did on the other side so that it's even. And then 1, 2, 3. Alright, as you can see, I have 2 tails there on either side that's sticking out to the front that I need to pull to the back. And I have like what appears to be only 2 stitches but very thick, and that's because again we had 3 layers of the same 2 stitches. So we'll pull everything to the back, knot it, secure our threads, and then we are done with the drawstring for now. Now your drawstrings are done. If you want, you can try and get in that little raw edge right there and do some edge painting. That's completely up to you. Alright, so now we will move on to the next step in the assembly, which is to place these 2 pieces, your back lining and your main lining, right sides together. And I have found it easiest just to clip the drawstrings out of the way. And then align this edge and your seams and clip in place. Now that you have clipped this edge here, you'll need to make 3 markings that I tell you in the pattern. That would be 1 inch below this bottom fabric edge here, a 1/2 inch up from the bottom corner, and 1 1/4 inch up from that bottom corner as well. And those are going to be our markings that we're going to use to help us grade our seam allowance in and then back out. So what we will do is we'll start at this top edge, or the bottom edge, really, it doesn't matter. But you will start stitching using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And we're going to continue stitching down. And then right when we hit this bottom edge here, we're going to aim to increase our seam allowance up to 5/8 inch by this 1 inch mark. As we continue to go down, we're going to maintain that 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then once we hit this 1.25 inch marking, we're going to grade back down to a 3/8 inch seam allowance and then continue on until we hit the bottom of the edge. Alright, so I've already started stitching, but as I start the seam, I'm going to start with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and just continue that down till I hit this fabric edge there. And then I'm going to again aim to reach 5/8 inch by that 1 inch mark. And so I'm just going to angle my fabric to the side, and then once I see my fabric cross that 5/8 inch mark on my machine, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to just now straighten it out so that I can continue to follow that 5/8 measurement by the time, or for the rest of this side. Now I have not hit my 1 inch mark yet. Oops, that's my clip. I don't know if you can see that, but it's right there. So I was able to hit 5/8 inch at about the 3/4 inch mark. So that's something that it's okay if you hit it before the 1 inch mark. You just kind of want to get there by then. And so now I have hit that 1.25 inch marking, and so I'm just going to angle my bag back out and try and hit 3/8 by that 1/2 inch marking. And that's normally all that I need. And then I finish out my seam. Alright, you can see that we have graded that stitching as called for in the pattern. So 3/8 inch up to a 5/8, continue 5/8, and then back to a 3/8. And so what happens now, when we open it back up, we will be top stitching the back panel, not the side panels. And so you'll see where you did that grading, you have a little bit of an odd area there because your fabric really doesn't have a place for it to expand. So we're going to do some snipping along the way to kind of help the fabric expand as it needs to, so we can top stitch that curve comfortably. So I just snip horizontally into that seam allowance there, and then again right there, right at kind of where you get that angle. And then I will take it to the machine and press it as flat as I can. And before we take it to the machine to press that seam nice and flat, what we also want to do is to, if you can faintly see that marking here along the edge, in the middle of that marking is about the 3/8 inch mark. And so you want to cut horizontally into that seam allowance there. You don't want to cut your stitches, so be careful. But you do want to cut both sides of that seam allowance so that you are catching, so that we can move that out of the way for later on. So now we will open this up, and what you want to do is take that clipped section up top and just push it to the side. Everything else will be pressed as well as you can towards the back lining. I know that it's going to be a little awkward to do that, but grading that seam allowance up to 5/8 really gives us a better fitting lining, because we have so much foam in there that gives so much bulk that we have to really reduce the size of the lining here. And I want to make you cut different sized pieces for the interior, not only in your fabric but also in your pattern pieces, and print them out, and then potentially cut the wrong one of your exterior. So instead we just sew a bigger seam allowance and we kind of work with it that way. So let's go and press this as flat as we can, as carefully as we can, and then we'll check back in. Now that you have pressed everything the best that you could, we'll take it to the machine and you will top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from this edge here on the back panel. Now be careful as you come close to your zipper overlay. You may want to swap out for a zipper foot or a more narrow presser foot for this area, but it's whatever you're comfortable with, but just also be mindful of the little bit of bulk that is right there in this seam up here where those two lining pieces meet on either side. Alright, now we have finished top stitching that kind of funky seam there, but we'll repeat that whole process that we did for this seam over here on the other one. You'll need to make the same markings that you did on the other side on this side as well, and it doesn't really matter which side you do it on, it just depends on whichever side you're going to be looking at while you sew. So go ahead and do that, and then when it comes time to top stitch, I'll show you how I top stitch this seam, as it will become a tube and not a flat project. Alright, before I get started, you'll see that I have that top snip section pointing towards the main panel. Hopefully you can see that. I'm going to start top stitching. And what I'm going to do is, as I continue to go down, it's probably going to be a little hard to see on the camera, but I'm just going to continue to bunch and bunch and bunch and bunch and bunch until I hit the end of my stitch line. And then now we have a tube, and we can begin attaching the base. So before we attach the base, we want to find the sides of this tube. So match up those two bottom center markings on the main lining panel and the back lining, and then just pinch them to the sides and find the center the best that you can. It's going to be a little awkward because of that extra bubble right there, but just do the best you can, and whatever feels comfortable is more than likely going to be the center that you need. And I like to just do little snips. And now we will need the stapler if you're using that, or clips, and your base lining and the rest of your lining as well. So on those 4 center marks, you want to match up these 4 center marks of your base lining. I just line up that little point of my center marking with the line that I drew on my base lining, or if you snipped a corner or a triangle out of your base lining, line those up, and then staple, and try to keep your staples within a 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch or less. Sorry. I tend to stick to around the 1/8 inch mark just to be safe and keep it fully away from my feed dogs, but it's whatever you're comfortable with. Alright, so now we will just continue to clip along these straight edges as much as you can until that main lining starts to pull away from that curve. Once it does, stop stapling, and then we'll clip into that section to help it expand into those curves. Alright, so now you can see I've stapled my straight edges, but my main body is pulling away from those rounded edges. So what we want to do is to just snip into those straight edges about 1/4 of an inch deep and 1/4 inch apart. All along the unclipped edge. Once you've done that, just take your piece and try to press it into that curve the best that you can. Now, the lining is going to fit a little bit more snug on your base than your exterior will, because there's a slightly smaller circumference to the lining the further up that you go. So just do it the best that you can, but it should still work comfortably without any major puckers. So just be patient and expand it the best that you can. Then you will repeat that process for the remaining 3 rounded corners. When it comes time to do the edges with the seam on them, do not clip into your seam because you don't want to compromise that. Clip right next to it. Trim this little seam allowance back so you can see your edge clearly, and then snip right next to the top stitching. And that way you still have some expansion happening and you're not compromising that seam. Now we will take this to the machine and sew around this edge using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I like to sew with the base flat on my machine, and then I have the main lining pointing up so that I can comfortably maneuver it around my machine and reposition as I go. Go carefully around the curves, and then only reposition your fabric as your needle is in the down position. And I just like to pivot and reposition every couple of stitches around the curves. Alright, now your base has been sewn onto your lining, and double check that there are no puckers. And then you can trim this edge using some pinking shears. On these edges here where you have that seam on those corners, make sure that you're not cutting into the seam there. Just trim around it the best that you can. You don't want to compromise that seam in any way. What you can do there is push that seam back and then just trim the base seam allowance around there with your pinking shears, just to remove as much bulk as you can. The last bit of trimming that I like to do on the lining is to just trim down this back seam allowance on either side so that none of this seam allowance is sitting on top of or in front of the zipper pocket lining. It's sitting right next to it. That's just a personal preference, but I like the way it sits in the finished bag better that way. And then we will take some double-sided tape, some 1/4 inch double-sided tape, and apply it just above this line that we drew in our prep work. As you can see, I have applied double-sided tape right at that line that we drew in the prep work, but making sure that it's sitting on the side that is closest to the top edge of the bag. And then we will remove that double-sided tape backing. And we will fold over this raw edge to meet that line that we drew. And we will just press it down to fully adhere the raw edge to that line. When you get to these back seams, make sure that they are pointing toward the main body lining so that you have a reduced bulk there. Since the bag is designed with the same seams on the outside and on the inside, they are top stitched in opposite directions, so it's harder to make this top stitching seam up here flat without doing it this way. When I get to this part where I am hitting that center mark, I do like to just extend it a little bit so that I can see it when I'm placing the interior into the exterior. Now I just like to place an extra clip here on those back seams because they like to pop up a little bit. And then we can set our lining aside for now, and we can move on to the magnet bridge installation. For installing the magnet bridge, you'll need your fully assembled and dry magnet bridge, your bridge overlay stabilizer, and your main body panel. On the wrong side of your bridge overlay, you will place 2 strips of 1/8 inch double-sided tape about 1/8 of an inch in from either long edge. Also make sure that they are not in the seam allowance on the sides. Then you would remove your double-sided tape backing from your bridge overlay and place it centered and 3.5 inches down from the top edge of the main body panel. On your paper pattern piece, if you printed that out, you will see that there is a preview window for the magnet bridge overlay. You can also use that to help you place it on the main body panel if you'd like. Just like we did for the zipper pocket overlay, we will top stitch around this outer edge using either a 1/8 inch or less seam allowance, and we'll be starting with long tails and leaving long tails so we can pull them both to the wrong side of the fabric and knot and secure them there. Alright, I have just finished that top stitching. I will pull this last thread through to the back side and knot it. Now that you have secured your threads, you will measure in 1 inch from this side of the bridge overlay, and you will draw a 1 inch line centered vertically. After that, you will carefully cut along that 1 inch line. Now that you have cut both of those lines, on the back side of your main body panel, you will trim away the foam between the area you just cut and the stitch line. So these 2 sections of foam will be trimmed away. You may end up separating the foam from the fusible layer that is on it, and that's okay. The goal is to reduce the bulk here because some of that magnet bridge is going to go into the back of the main body panel, and we just don't need any excess bulk there. Once you've finished trimming away that foam, you will then place 1/4 inch double-sided tape along either short edge of your magnet bridge. At this point, it'd be a good idea to remove those markings from your fabric, and then you can go ahead and insert your magnet bridge into those slots. Now, you may need to open up those slots just a little bit more than they already are. You don't want your magnet bridge to be pinched inside that slot. So what you can do is just very carefully just take the tiniest little extra bit on the top and the bottom so that you're adding that space evenly so that it's still centered, so that it's not crooked once it's been inserted. So you don't want it to be too open, just like the drawstring, and you don't want it to be too tight to where that magnet bridge is getting pinched. And you will insert both of them, both sides. And then what you'll do is remove that double-sided tape backing and just align it right there with those stitches on the side. But now that you've done that, you'll see how you get that 3D like magnet bridge, as I call it, and then your drawstrings will be able to sit behind that, and so you don't have them in the way of your magnet when you go to close your flap. The next step will be very similar to how we did the drawstring. Just along the height of the magnet bridge, you will top stitch 1/8 inch away from this cut edge. But for this one, I just backstitch 1 to 2 times right at the beginning and end. I make sure that I keep it nice and neat, and I try to stay within my needle holes as much as I can, but I don't do a full down and back up backstitch. There is not a lot of pressure getting put on this seam, just a little bit. We're also going to be riveting it in place, so it's pretty secure. This is just making sure that it stays put where we want it, and then that's about it, versus the drawstring where we really need to have that extra security on those stitches. As you can see, I have done that top stitching. I have done only a single stitch at the beginning and the end of each row. And then I'll pull everything to the back side and knot each group together. Alright, those threads have been knotted and secured in the back. And so now we will be fusing the stabilizer to the back of the magnet bridge. This is a little finicky because you do have a 3D piece here that you'll be pressing, but it's important, just like it was for the drawstring. This helps us close up that back panel, and then we will be riveting through it to secure the decoville, and we don't have to worry about any open holes in our bag. Once you have fused on that decoville light, then you can place the marks down for your rivet holes, then punch your rivet holes and install your rivets. Now that you have set both of your rivets, your magnet bridge is fully installed, and we can move on to the exterior assembly. For the exterior assembly, you will need your back panel, main body panel, and your base. Just a reminder that we did install the purse feet in the prep section at the beginning of the pattern, so if you haven't done that, go ahead and do that now before we get started on the exterior assembly. Just like we did for the lining, you will place these right sides together. I do tend to unravel my webbing here just because it gets in the way if I don't. But you will clip these this edge right sides together. Now that you have clipped along this edge, you will take this to your machine and stitch along this edge using a 3/8 inch seam allowance, making sure that you're back stitching at the beginning and end, and you are maneuvering your flap out of the way as you need to. Now that you have sewn this edge here with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, also similar to what we did in the lining, you will be doing some clipping into the seam allowances. For this one, you will be snipping into the top just like we did before, a 3/8 inch from that top corner, catching both seam allowances, and clip just that back panel seam allowance to the side. The rest of that seam allowance we will top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from that seam on the main body panel. Alright, we've just top stitched this seam. Again, we did not catch this little snip seam allowance or these two seam allowances up here. Everything else was top stitched to the main body panel. So now we will repeat those steps for the other seam, but when it comes to top stitching this seam, I'm going to show you how I do it on the machine, again because it will be a tube and it's just a little bit harder to sew. For top stitching that second seam, you can see that I'm starting from the bottom here and just working my way up. And I'm just going to go until it starts to become uncomfortable to do so. Once it feels uncomfortable, I will just stop and leave long tails and pull it out. Then I'll pull that where I just finished stitching, I'll pull that thread to the back side. Now I have entered the bag through the top, and I will just finish my top stitching in that last hole that I ended in, and I'll leave long tails. And then I will knot them together and secure those threads. Okay, I've finished top stitching that second seam, and I did knot those threads together right there and secured them. And if you can see, again it's pretty hard to see inside the bag, but I have secured my stitches and you can't really tell where they start and stop. Now that we have sewn the body of the bag, it will be time to install the base. And so before we do that, we need to find the centers of the sides. So just like we did for the lining, we will do that here for the exterior, matching up these two center markings, and then snipping or marking those side centers. Alright, we brought the stapler back out again, and we have attached those 4 center markings on your base to the 4 center markings on your main body. So again, we will continue to clip or staple these straight edges, and then as it starts to pull away from this rounded corner here on the base, stop clipping or stapling, and then we will snip into there to help ease this straight edge into this rounded corner. Alright, so then you would snip again about a 1/4 inch in and a 1/4 inch apart. I just eyeball it, and then you'll stretch it just a little bit into that rounded corner and then clip or staple. So what's different from the lining is that we left this seam allowance free, and that's going to enable us to have a less bulky edge right there around that corner. And so just make sure that while you're stapling or clipping it, you are doing that and keeping that seam allowance right there open. Now you should have clipped and stapled and eased all of those straight edges into those rounded corners. And then we will take this to the machine and stitch this bottom edge using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Alright, we have stitched all the way around that outside edge, and now it's time to remove the staples and then trim it just like we did before with the pinking shears, making sure that we're not cutting into this seam, but we are trimming that base seam allowance there, not the back panel and main lining seam. Alright, we've trimmed down this edge here of that bottom seam using pinking shears. We didn't trim that seam right there, we left that intact. And then now will be time to apply 1/4 inch double-sided tape around the edge of the bag right there at that line that you drew in the prep work. Once you have applied that double-sided tape, go ahead and remove that backing and do just what we did with the lining and fold it down to meet that, fold the raw edge down to meet that line. This time we're going to point that seam allowance that we clipped towards the back panel. Alright, turn that exterior right side out now that you have done all that. This is a great time to press the bag if you'd like to do that, since you still have access to that foam in there and nothing else is in your way. It's a good time to do that if you want to, but other than that, it is time now to move on to the final assembly. Alright, now that you have your exterior right side out and you have your interior still as we left it, which would be, I guess you could call this inside out, but we're going to place this inside of our exterior. Now the first thing that you'll want to do is to match up these back seams here. Now if you folded your seam allowance the correct way and you've top stitched the correct way, it shouldn't be too bulky here, and you should have seam allowance top stitching here and then top stitching on the left side. Once you have matched up those two back seams, then continue clipping along that straight edge. Then you can go ahead and match up those two center markings. And so as you continue to clip now, you're going to see as you clip, it might feel like the interior doesn't completely fit in the exterior, but it does. What's happening is just that there's foam that needs to be compressed, and so as you continue to clip, you'll see that it fits better and better as you go. And you can see I kind of tug on it a little bit, and that's just so that I can make sure that I'm constantly clipping this in line with where it's supposed to be. And that's just my way of making sure that everything is even and centered. Go ahead and tuck your drawstrings into your zipper pocket just to make sure that you don't accidentally sew over those. But we will top stitch this edge where we just dropped in that lining using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. I top stitch from the lining side, meaning that you're going to see my bobbin thread on the outside of the bag. As long as your tension is accurate, that won't be an issue for you. But if you have a free arm machine, then you can definitely sew from the exterior of the bag. That's not an issue. I just have a flatbed, so this is how I have to do it. As you sew, make sure that you're only adjusting with the needle in the down position, and don't stress too much about this top edge, because it doesn't get seen that much when the bag is closed, or even when it's open. There's grommets and drawstrings and so much going on that no one really focuses on that top stitching. So don't stress too much, and let's get started. Well, the sad news is that I played bobbin chicken on camera, or I thought it was on camera, and it wasn't. So you missed that, but you also missed me top stitching the top of the bag. So I just wanted to show you that I start right about at this corner, and I will just put it under here like this, and then I will just continue to feed it around as I go. As I get towards this back seam, I make sure that I really push everything under. As you can see, I can comfortably do that. I just keep going, keep going, keep going. And then I will pull my bobbin thread to the lining side before I get before I reach that final hole, and then I end my stitching in the hole that I began in. Alright, we've just finished this top stitch. We did 1/8 of an inch away from that top folded edge. As you see, it does compress and fit quite nicely in there. I just gave you a rundown because unfortunately I thought I was recording and I wasn't, but that's the name of this recording so far. So now that you're done that, you just pull your threads to the lining, knot them, and you can secure them by melting or trimming or gluing, or you can feed them through. Alright, so I have trimmed and, well, I have knotted and fed those tails into the lining with a long needle, and so now I can just trim them, and those are taken care of. So now it will be time to measure for the grommets. So starting from the back seam and measuring down 5/8 of an inch, you want to make a marking at 1.5 inches, 4 inches, and 7 3/4 inches. Once you have placed those 6 marks, you will take your hole punch and you will carefully punch holes in each of those markings. I like to use the edge of my desk, and I use a hammer and a just standard hole punch for leather, and that works for me. Make sure that you're taking the time to perfectly center that hole punch over that dot there. You just need to kind of line it up and press into the fabric just a little bit to see. And then once you get it perfectly centered, punch that hole. Make sure that your drawstrings are out of the way every single time. Alright, all 6 holes were punched. And now you will need to insert and set your grommets. Now, because there are so many different types of grommets, there are force fit, traditional, and screw-in grommets, I did not include specific instructions for each kind of grommet. You need to really follow just the instructions from the place that you purchased it or from the manufacturer instructions. Use the tools that you have available to you, hand tools or a rivet die and a hand press. However you need to set them, you just need to make sure that you're setting them properly. As far as for the hole size go, I did punch 3/8 inch holes because for this hardware color I have traditional grommet sizes, so I only need to punch a 3/8 inch hole. But for a force fit grommets, they're thicker and I tend to use a 1/2 inch hole, and that normally helps me. It's a little bit of a tight fit on the back, but otherwise it works really well on the front. So I will leave that up to you, and while you are setting your grommets, I will be setting mine. All 6 grommets have been installed, and I did give the bag a little bit of a press. And now we're going to feed the drawstring through those grommets. We're going to go out the first one, in the second one, and back out of the third one. And we're going to repeat that process for the other side. Now you can kind of cinch these down a little bit and then hold it with some clips while we work on the rest of the bag. Alright, now we can work on the strap assembly, and you will need to make 2 marks on each of the ends of your straps, one at a 1/2 inch and one at 2 inches, and then you will punch holes in each of those marks. Now that you have punched those holes, go ahead and insert a rectangle ring between those 2 holes, and then insert and set a rivet. Alright, the rectangle rings were inserted between those 2 holes. I've folded the strap to the underside, matched up those holes, inserted that rivet, and then set the rivet on both of the straps. So making the adjustable webbing part is just a little bit more tricky than the straps, because normally when you're making adjustable straps you put the tri-glide on first, but for us we are going to be doing it last, so you kind of have to feed everything a little bit backwards and then install the rivet as the final part of the strap. I say in the pattern, if you're doing seatbelt webbing or something that's a very tightly wound webbing, you can get away with just doing rivets. I'm using seatbelt webbing today, so I'm just going to use rivets. So if you're using materials such as polyester or nylon for your adjustable straps, then you need to be sewing that additional line of stitching there at the end, not just using the rivets. But since I'm using seatbelt webbing today, we're going to install it as the instructions call for that. So for the seatbelt webbing, you need to place marks, 3 marks towards the end of your webbing, and it needs to be at 3 1/4, 1 3/4, and a 1/2 inch. Once you have made those 3 marks, go ahead and punch those holes. Before you go any further, if you need to remelt that edge to make sure that it's not going to fray anymore, now's a good time to do it. So this is a little confusing, but I'm going to do the best that I can to show you how I do this. You go through the bottom of the tri-glide, over the center bar, and back through. Then you will take this end and push it over that rectangle ring and bring it back. Then you will go back under that tri-glide center bar, bring it back over, and then you will fold that first hole back to meet that second hole that you punched. And you're going to match up both of those with that third hole, that 3 1/4 inch hole. Then you would match up all of those 3 holes and insert and set a rivet. Now you notice there's a loop here and a straight strap here. That's what we want. You do not, and you want to make sure that you are only riveting against the bottom side of the loop. You are not catching this top part of the loop, because if you do that, you won't have an adjustable strap. Alright, so I've matched up those two holes, and I'm going to match up this third one. So the reason why we did that is so that edge right there of the webbing is tucked right under that center bar. So there's no raw edge that's exposed, and you have a nice clean adjustable strap now. So go ahead and set that rivet and repeat that process for the other strap. The final look of the strap is this, and then you have that fold pointing towards right there in the center of that bulk. It's wrapping around that center bar, and you can extend it like so. Alright, now you have two adjustable straps, and you are ready to move on to the final touches. The first step for the final touches will be getting that drawstring slider installed. So the first step in that will be to take your drawstring slider and find the wrong side, and then place it right underneath of your drawstrings. From there, you want to kind of eyeball the center a little bit, and then fold it over, one over the other. Shimmy those drawstrings to the outside, and then clip along this top and bottom. So now what you want to do is just loosen up this slider to a point to where you're going to get a comfortable slide. Now keep in mind that your rivets are probably not going to be as wide as this clip. If they are, that's great, but if they're not, you may want to make it just a little bit tight right now so that when you set your rivet, you're comfortably sliding it along there. And so once you feel like you've got the right tightness, go ahead and slide it off. Once you slide it off, then place clips on the side so that you can lock in that position. And then remove those top and bottom clips. Then place it on your cutting mat so that you can find the center. And then from both the top and the bottom, measure up 3/8 inch and make a mark for a rivet hole. Alright, so we placed 2 marks along that center line of this drawstring slider, and what we're going to do is now punch those holes there, insert and set our rivets, and then slide this back onto our drawstrings. Just a note while I'm doing this is that you may need to adjust the placement of your rivets depending on the cap size that you're using. For 8mm, this works for me. Alright, now just slide it up and cinch it. Remember to be pinching those rivets, because if you're pinching the side, you're not going to be able to really move that drawstring slider up. Tuck your drawstrings into under that magnet bridge so they stay out of the way. And let's get an idea of how pretty this magnet turned out. And then the next thing we're going to do is install the cord ends. Alright, for the cord ends, just place a little bit of glue inside your cord end. Don't put too much or it will ooze out. And then slide it on the end of your drawstring. And then carefully add a little bit of Loctite to the screw. Reminder that this is messy if you're like me and have a messy bottle, so be aware of that and maybe have a cloth nearby to clean it off. And then just screw it in there. Repeat that process for the second one. Alright, we're going to pretend that I didn't forget these last 2 rivets, so let's go ahead and mark our placement for them. So right next to the top stitching on the inside of the bag, you're going to just make a mark centered right over where that drawstring is on the inside of the bag. We will go ahead and punch holes in either one of those marks, then insert and set rivets, and then we're all done. When you're punching these holes, make sure that the flap is out of the way and you are punching through all of those layers. Right, that was our last step. And ta-da! I hope you love your finished bag, and I hope you held on to your butts for this one, Bird Chachas, because it was a long ride for sure. 2 hours of listening to me is enough for anyone. So I will be done soon. I just wanted to say that I really hope that you loved it and that you share with me on social media so I can see it and I can love it too. I am on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. On Instagram and TikTok, you can search for me at Knotted Threads Co. On Facebook, you can search for Knotted Threads Patterns and join that group there where you can share and ask questions and get further pattern support where I monitor daily to answer any questions you may have. So, anyway, thanks again for joining me. Thanks for your support in purchasing this pattern, and happy sewing!